I'm Eddy Miles, administrator of the Facebook pages Trouble in Our Day and Never Trump Patriots, and I've been asked to talk about my Dutch grandmother, my Oma. Let's see, Matilda Willis, or Van Bray originally. She was a girl in the 1930s when the world was kind of flying apart. There was global depression. There was a lot of political upheaval or changes in sentiment in Germany and Italy. Her mother actually liked Hitler. She thought he was doing good things for the German people. Her father, on the other hand, who was also a politician in the town they lived in, thought that he was very much a panderer and an evil man. They were both strong Catholics. One of the reasons her mother liked Hitler was because he seemed to be in favor of pro-Catholic policies. On the other hand, when the Catholic bank that my great-grandfather used was going out of business, it didn't tell anyone. He put in his last deposit, and then the next, as he walked out, basically they flipped the sign, and he did not see his money again. Eventually, after a long period of neutrality, the Germans came in and invaded Holland, even though they said they wouldn't. My Oma's mother, my great-grandmother, she walked out into the street as the convoys were coming down and shook her fist and yelled at the German soldiers. One of the soldiers in the tank who was on top, he looked over at her, pointed his gun at her, and my family members, they all just kind of dragged their mother away and back into the house. At that point, things got pretty bad. There was huge supply shortages. So for several days after the first wave of the invasion, whatever was in the stores, that was it. Everyone bought that, and then for days there were no more stocked shelves at the grocers or wherever. Jews had been persecuted for quite some time, not being allowed to. Now that Germany was in Holland, schools were not allowed to enroll Jewish students. There was a lot of resistance, both in terms of the way people felt, but also an active sabotage resistance. One of my Oma's brothers at one point filled sand in the dive bomber planes of the Germans when nobody was looking. And I think he eventually had to leave the country in the dead of night on a train so that he wouldn't get caught for all his saboteur activities. As a lot of that supply shortages ran on, there'd be times where family members would have to travel to another town to get supplies, say for a baby, or look to someone who might have a farm nearby for food. A lot of women turned to prostitution. There were plenty of German soldiers willing to pay for that. And my grandmother, my Oma, she was fortunate enough to have her dad place her in a nurse's training program. Not so much a program, it was just like he had friends at the hospital and said, hey, take my daughter, teach her how to be a nurse so she doesn't have to go to a German ammunition labor camp, a factory. And she started cleaning toilets and learning the basics of triage and bandaging. And she had to watch a lot of people she knew, she grew up with, die. And the first person she ever gave a painkiller shot to, something in the morphine family, was her milkman. The milkman that she had watched, every week come to the door and deliver the milk. And then he died after the shot because he was losing blood and there was no way to turn him around. All these invasions of Germany into Holland, Germany into Poland, created a huge wave, created all these waves of refugees. A lot of them were Jewish, a lot of them were just people who were now fleeing the Nazis. Churchill, from England, was trying to put together an alliance in Europe. As I said, Holland originally didn't want to join; it wanted to remain neutral. But that did not work out for them. My grandmother, my Oma, she was very happy when the Americans came in. It wasn't all roses, though, because she got shrapnel in her from the bombings. The shrapnel in her size that can give her pain, especially during cold weather, throughout the rest of her life. 7 pieces of metal were from an American bomb. She was happy that the planes were liberating the city, but on the other hand, it was collateral damage. She was collateral damage, wounded from the airstrikes. But after the war, she did some further nurses studies in Belgium to get some more formal training and credentials, and then she immigrated to America, and so her immigrant experience was very interesting. She's Catholic, and America is mostly Protestant, so she was definitely a supporter of Kennedy. Even though she couldn't vote, she was excited to see John F. Kennedy running for president. Sometime after she had moved to America. She had a little bit of a culture shock, because even in the 1950s, what we consider a very conservative time, compared to her little Dutch village, her little town in Holland, she said it was like the women were all running around in their underwear. But she had a very strong faith. She always liked to say, "Do your best and God will do the rest." There were a lot of moments during the war where just things looked entirely bleak and like they weren't going to work out at all. Periods where she thought that maybe her family had been killed in one of the attacks, whether it's Germans on the Dutch or the Americans on the Germans. A lot of times she was worried about where food would come from for the next day. There are a lot of miracles, big and small, that she had to really learn to be grateful for and to be hopeful for, and not give up and just wait for that next little miracle or that next big miracle. To the point where, like, one time when she wanted to commit suicide with with an overdose of antibacterial tablets, her arm, she couldn't bring her arm up to her mouth to swallow the pills, because her arms had been sore from an injury from a previous bombardment. And it just was unusually sore that day, and she couldn't just lift it up, and she heard in her mind, like, think about what you're doing, don't think about yourself, you have patients to take care of. And so there's definitely that mentality of put aside your personal feelings in the moment, just give them to God, pray them away, and do what you need to do, because people are counting on you. And you need to be there to give hope to other people. And so definitely when we see some of the same problems that were in the 1930s happening today, with like waves of refugees, with authoritarian governments, people who think they're big shots, that's a phrase my Oma liked to use a lot, Mr. Big or big shots. We need to remember that we're not in control. She would say God is in control. And because of that, we have to do what we can to make the world a better place and to give other people hope. So I think that's a pretty good summary.